Hi guys, my name is Christopher, and if you're anything interested in the War of the Ring game from Arrakis Games, you might know of me as one of the original playtesters, both for the first and second edition, as well as the author of the strategy guide that came with the anniversary edition of the game. And I am also one of the two who designed the Breaking of the Fellowship scenario for the War of the Ring board game, which is available for free as a download from Arrakis Games website. In this video I will do a short preview and comparison coming at the game Dune by someone who's like really into War of the Ring. It's obviously my favorite game ever, since it got me into being part of the design process of a game, playtesting, and writing about it even after it's been released. So this is me looking at the game, the mechanics, the theme, as a lover of War of the Ring. At the time of the preview, I have played the game 4 times using the tabletop simulator module provided by Simon Games, and I'm using the rules as presented on their website. And I've played 4 games, twice as House Atreides and twice as House Harkonnen. Let's begin by mentioning the similarities with War of the Ring, since the game is designed by Francesco and Marco, 2 of the 3 designers of War of the Ring. Both games use action dice to limit what the player can do, which means it's more about adapting your strategy to the available options and not just what is the best thing to do right now, because the logistics of the dice might not allow you to do that. And it also makes the player look at your opponent, like what kind of dice does your opponent have, what kind of actions can they take, so you don't have to try to prevent stuff that they can't do anyway. So it's very much a game of management of your action options, resource management in the case where actions are your resources. Both of the games work basically the same. There are slight differences in the faces of the dice and what they do and how much they allow you to do on the board. Some are the same and some are very different because of the difference in what the theme is, of course. But the action dice work, and coming from War of the Ring, it's super easy to pick up on how they're supposed to work and what they are supposed to be doing or not doing and not allowing you to do by how they limit what you can do. Like in War of the Ring, you can pass when you don't have enough actions, like when your opponent has more action dice. But in this one, the Atreides player, who is the one who's usually has the less dice available, is allowed to take desert actions, which basically means the planet is against the Harkonnens, like with sandworms and sand, or like worm signs, and ability to move the Fremen around riding the worms of Arrakis. So there are less bad things that could happen to you because of even if I have less dice, I'm still able to do stuff and affect, especially where the harvesters are and how the House Harkonnen can get spice, because the worms and the worm signs limit that and allows single units to just attack harvesters that are unprotected. The other one here is the units, like how you fight in the game. There are regular units, there are elites, and there are leaders, and they basically work the same way. Regulars is a one guy providing 1 die, taking 1 hit. Elites takes 1 hit to reduce down to regular. They still only provide 1 die in the battle, but it takes twice as much to kill them. And then there are leaders who give you benefits if you roll the special result on the die. Instead of in War of the Ring, they give you rerolls. In Dune, they basically gives you a slightly higher chance of getting either a shield or a dagger, which is attack or defense, depending on which leader you have. And this is where I can see the theme can go in, the different leaders have different buffs. The Baron Harkonnen is very defensive. He gives you a lot of shields, while the Beast Raban gives you 2 daggers instead, because he's very offensive and just wants to create chaos and do damage. So this is where you have an interesting choice as a player, am I needing to defend stuff or am I needing to attack stuff? Which leader do I use? There's also a second type of elite in this game that's not present in War of the Ring, and that is the Sardaukar for House Harkonnen and the Feydakin for the Fremen, which are basically the elite of the elite soldiers on either side. And they're all very similar to each other because they both grow up on planets that are super harsh, if you know the lore. Sulusa Secundus is like a prison planet where bad people go and are trained to be super soldiers, or born and become super soldiers. And Arrakis is basically the same due to the desert environment. And their ability is to pierce shields, like remove shields in combat from your opponent, which means they are super, super necessary to quickly dispatch enemy troops. Anything else about the units? Nothing much. They, like, if you know War of the Ring, you basically get what they do. You just have to pick up on the difference on the second type of elite and the fact that leaders can actually be taken as casualties. They actually take 1 damage to kill, which I think is good because combat is very brutal in Dune. I'm going to get to that later. And the final thing here is in the legacy are the cards, the map, and the characters, and how they all together bring the theme of the game, or like the War of the Ring of the game. They do it in the same way, basically, in Dune. You have cards that represent events from the novel. You have the prescience cards, which represent the things Paul and the Fremen do to push back the Harkonnen and eventually force the Emperor to come to Dune and, well, spoilers for the book, basically make sure that Paul can claim the throne. So the theme is like, it oozes theme, just like War of the Ring. If you know the story, you will love this game. The map is, of course, like that's one of the limitations of these kind of games. You have to be true to the map, both in War of the Ring, which means like some of the areas are not often used because they are very out of the way. And Dune here might have the same issue, but in my 4 games, I've basically seen harvesters and small legions of Fremen troops hunting them and sandworms showing up all over the map. So I think the map is better utilized in Dune, but it adds a theme because you know where you're safe in the mountains, you know you're at risk when you're on the plateaus, and you know you're basically dead if you're caught at the end in the desert. And that captures the theme of Dune very, very well. And of course, the characters are the characters. They do stuff to bend the rules in the way that fits with what they do in the novel. So everything there is also very nice, very thematic, and without of these, it's just a generic war game. It has to have the theme, and I think it's captured very well in both games. So how is the game different from War of the Ring then? What kind of implementations have the designers done to like think it's better to do it in a different way than they did in War of the Ring? And I find basically 2 areas where this is mostly seen. And the first one is the pace of the game, because if you look at War of the Ring is a game that takes, like, once you know the game, you can get it done in 90 minutes, 2 hours. If you're new to the game, it can take a lot of hours. Because there's the journey for the Fellowship that it needs to take, and it's a lot of movement and mustering for the Shadow to get their armies to get to 10 victory points. In Dune, the game starts like right out of the gate. There is no room for, I wouldn't say mistakes, but there's like no room for doing something for no reason or like being indecisive. You need to formulate a plan based on the dice you roll, the prescience card you see, and then like go for it. It's much about like, how do I amass my victory points the most efficient based on the actions available. Because in all my games, like, it's been a brutal tempo if you compare it to War of the Ring. If you come into this from War of the Ring and you expect the same kind of build-up, middle game and end game, like when Frodo enters Mordor, the end game of War of the Ring kicks in. There is no such thing in Dune. In Dune, it's like the end game from the start. It's amped up to max from the start. You have to make sure you get your victory points as fast as possible to force your opponent to take risks and do stuff to keep pace with you, so to speak. if you compare to War of the Ring, as in who does what, like in War of the Ring, the shadow player sets the pace through the combat. Like if it takes too long to lay siege and capture the strongholds of the Free Peoples, the Fellowship moves and doesn't really care, because they can move at a slow pace and not risking taking much corruption. In Dune, it's the Harkonnens who do the same thing. Basically, they set the pace through their armies, their legions. The bigger the legions they get soon, the less time the Atreides player know he has to get the prescience cards completed to score victory points. So that's kind of like the same, but in a different way, because there are less things you can go. I'm going to get to this later, but basically it's like the pace is different in the way that House Harkonnen can set the pace that the Atreides player has to do stuff, and basically how much risk do the Atreides player take to do his things. Because if the Harkonnen player is not massing the armies fast enough or maneuvering them fast enough, the Atreides player has more time to like position his troops to be able to do all the different prescience cards that might show up. While in War of the Ring, there are you have a few turns where you can do the wrong things, or that not optimally do what you should have done depending on what your opponent does, because it's such a long slog. And they both have their pros and cons, and I don't think one is better than the other, but they are very different games in the pace. So they kind of scratch different itches for that kind of game. It's like you set up the game and then it's boom. Now it's like on the knife edge, who will win? While in War of the Ring, it takes some time to maneuver around the board, both militarily and card-wise and companion-wise, into make sure the Fellowship doesn't take too much damage. The combat in War of the Ring is both card and dice driven in a more intricate way, I would say, than Dune, because the cards are dual use. One is for do stuff on the map, and one is spend them to do something specific in combat. In Dune, you spend the card to just add a die every turn of the fight, just to make sure you get more dice, because more dice means potentially more damage, which means you win the fight. What I've found in my 4 games is I've played 3 different people as well, so it's not like me versus one player all the time. Is the combat is much more ferocious. It's not like big sieges taking a few days to finish. It's instant surprise attacks. So you need to bring big armies if you're the Harkonnen, because you can't risk not winning the fights, because it's not like in War of the Ring where you can lay siege and then slowly move up reinforcements if needed. It's you have to have an army big enough to take the siege or the enemy army you're aiming at, and then it's boom, one fight, and it's basically a decided game. One will win, one will lose, and you need to be prepared for that when you play the game. It's not like you can just throw an army away and lose it and then think you have enough time to send another army, because you won't. And that's also where you look at the dice. The dice in Dune, it's a 6-sided die. There are 2 shields, 3 daggers, and 1 special. And the special one is usually also a dagger, sometimes 2, rarely a shield. Sometimes some of the characters give them shields, but mostly they always give more offensive buffs, which means it's a damage race. It's not about mitigating damage, it's doing more damage than the opponent faster. Unlike War of the Ring, where it's more the sieges can be more war of attrition, because you have harder time to hit your opponents because they're behind the walls in sieges, and you can downgrade units to keep going. You don't have to do that in Dune. It's you continue unless you decide to stop for some reason, or unless the defender retreats. Once one army is smaller than the other, there is no risk. Let them retreat, they won't hit you back, because you will annihilate them if they waste an action die trying to hit you back. So the Atreides player is more okay, I will retreat with my last 2 guys, and then hopefully I can send them hunting harvesters or something, because they can't reclaim the siege. Once the siege is destroyed, it's destroyed. You can't get it back like you can in War of the Ring. So it's more ruthless, more in your face, more damage, bang bang bang. That's what combat is all about in Dune. Yeah, depending on what kind of game you want, this might be good or bad, but I will get to that in my closing comments later. But those two things, the pace and the combat in general, are the two main ways the game deviates. So what are then the pros that I can say of the Dune War for Arrakis game? I've listed two things here and I will elaborate a bit. The first one is the theme. The second one is what I've called the immediacy. And if we start with the theme, this game is as much Dune as War of the Ring is War of the Ring. The characters are there, the events are there, Paul's struggle with finding the right future is there. The prescience cards, like which one should I go for, basically means like which ones do I want to happen, and the future you want to happen is the one decided for you by the victory card, which means the Harkonnen player doesn't really know how much you need of each type. And that's also very much something like that fits with the theme of Dune, like with the struggles of Paul. So I would say this game is as much Dune as War of the Ring is Lord of the Rings, and I think that's the highest accolade you could give to any board game if it could match the theme that oozes in War of the Ring. The second pro here is the immediacy, like if you want a game, I want to set up the game, and it was like boom, this is now we're fighting. Dune does that for you. You don't have to maneuver a lot, set stuff up a lot like you do in War of the Ring. And it's like, as I said before, it doesn't really matter. Neither one is better or worse. It's like, what do you want from the game? So they scratch different itches here. So if that's the kind of game you want, then Dune is absolutely like something you should be looking into, because it gets you into the action from the first action you take. And that's something I like. I would say that the length of War of the Ring, the slow build-up of War of the Ring in the opening is also a pro for that game, because it gives it more chance to add theme than this game does. But there's something like very satisfying knowing that this game will get into the fighting at once. And this is also accomplished by like the random setup, that you don't have the exact same setup every time, so you won't automatically do the things you like every game, because the setup might not allow you to. And that's also something I like you immediately have to look at the board, look at the dice available, and like, how can I make the best out of this situation? And that's a big pro for me when it comes to this game. I probably would have liked it just as much if it was a slow build-up like War of the Ring, but it would have been a much different game. And I already have War of the Ring, so I probably wouldn't have been as interested in Dune if it was doing the exact same thing. So what then are the negatives of Dune as far as I can see after 4 playthroughs? I've listed 2 here, and some of them will like move into other areas as well as I talk about them. But the dice variance and the interaction and counterplay for the House Harkonnen are my 2 worries, maybe. So if we start with the dice variance, it's like this game plays faster. There will be fewer turns in a game than there will be in War of the Ring. In War of the Ring, it's usually between 10 and 14 rounds. And in this game, I've played, none of my 4 games have been more than 4 rounds. One has been over in 2 rounds, and the other ones have been 3 rounds. Complete turns. I don't remember the round or turns or whatever the word they use there, but like 4 complete rounds of the game of rolling dice again at the start of each. And that means that spikes in the dice will be more important. If you get really bad action die results, but not bad enough so you have to re-roll them as per the re-roll rule for freak dice results. And like if they spikes positively for you and negatively for your opponent, it means you might get a head start that can't be caught up to. and I can see this happen way more in this game than in War of the Ring due to the number of turns played. There are more turns, which means more dice are rolled, and the more dice you roll, the bigger the chance are for the average results to even out throughout the game. So that's an issue, a worry for Dune. There are cards that let you flip one phase to another, and the Atreides have one phase that works like any other. So there are mechanics in the game to remedy it. The question is, like, is it enough? Because if you get a really bad roll in the first round and your opponent gets a really good roll, like let's say the Harkonnen gets lots of musters, and they're not called musters in this, it's called deployment and leaders, so you can move your units after you've created lots of units, lots of legions, while the Atreides get no deployment, so they can't reinforce their sieges. Like, that means there might be a risk of a very quick military victory for the Harkonnen. Then, on top of that early in the game, you only have 2 cards. So the odds of getting the cards that allow you to flip dice to another facing, like, they are very low. So there's a risk that the action dice spikes will, I wouldn't say will decide more games than I would say they never decided in War of the Ring, because there are so many turns. I mean, it might be if you get like one turn where you absolutely couldn't have it, because then the Free People player can do a military victory. But I would say that's because you've left your strongholds open for the possibility even of a military victory for the Free Peoples. So I would say it never happens. It's like a 99% certainty in War of the Ring that the action die rolls won't decide the game, because you roll them many more times than in Dune. And the same thing I would say goes for the combats, since the combats are very brutal. There's lots of hits on the dice. There's lots of ways to get more hits by playing the card for an extra die, or having leaders and characters in your armies that will convert special results into even more hits, daggers. And that means that if you spike if you spike your attack die and the opponent's dice are like really crappy, let's say they get lots of special dice when they only have one leader or no leader, or let's say they get many shields, but you have lots of super elites, Sardaukar or Filikin, that will penetrate the shield, so they don't matter, like if they get them in the wrong battles. Stuff like that is more affecting the outcome of this game more than the combat rolls and the action dice roll in War of the Ring, due to the shorter nature of the game. Now, if you don't mind this, it doesn't matter. But if you don't like not having as much control as you do in War of the Ring, this might be a turn-off. Because, well, out of the 4 games, I would say only one game was really, really lopsided in the action dice, and that was the one that was over in 2 turns, which basically meant that at the end of turn 2, the House Harkonnen had gotten so much deployment dice and so much maneuver dice, they called leadership I don't remember what they're called right now, but the one that lets you move 2 legions or attack with 1. So he could easily take all of my, enough of my sieges without me doing anything, because I didn't get any deployment dice to muster defenders in them. And then there was another issue at why it ended that quick, which will I get to in the closing comments, because it's one rule in this game that I absolutely don't like, and I will get to that later. So those are basically the cons when it comes to the dice variants. Like, if you can stomach this, it's fine, because if you embrace it, it's fine, because it affects both sides equally. It's just you might find it and then it's a shorter game, it's over quickly, you might have time to play another game again, and that time the dice variants might not be very important. So it doesn't have to be a bad thing, it's just something you have to know can happen. And I mean, there are of course ways that the rules aren't set in stone, that the designers can change something like this. They have options to make combat less brutal and stuff like that. They might have other things that they have in the pipes, to allow for the changing of dice and stuff like that we don't know of. But it can affect the gameplay, and if you're not prepared for it, it might be feeling like, why did I even bother? Because the dice just screwed me over. So that could be an issue. but I don't see it happen that often. And as long as you're prepared for it, I don't think you will mind, but it's something to pay attention to. The second part here of the cons is there's less interaction and counterplay for House Harkonnen in this game than there is for the Shadow in War of the Ring. Because in War of the Ring, you can decide if you want to chase Frodo and the Fellowship by placing Nazgul on their last position, if you want to move armies in the way, and there's like a strategy called paving the road to Mordor but with Nazgul, so when the Fellowship reveals or declares itself, it has a risk of ending up where the Nazgul are to give you rerolls for the hunt and stuff. In this game, there's really no big counterplay to the prescience cards. First of all, the Freeman Atreides doesn't know like which ones he's getting, so it's like he's trying to react to them. And the best way I found to do this is to look through the deck so you know what you might be expected to do. And then you realize, okay, if I spread armies thin all over the board, like in the desert, there are stuff that needs to be done by having people in certain spaces, and at the same time I can use them to try to hunt harvesters. And I know that I need my characters on the board to do stuff, so I shouldn't put them back at the end of round one. Like if I have Paul and Jessica on the board, keep them there, because in case I get the one that needs them on the board to do stuff, it's easier to achieve them. So there's less interaction and counterplay between the players when it comes to the prescience cards. And when it comes to the military game, it's basically the same as War of the Ring, so that's fine. And I mean, I can see ways for the designers here to tweak this as well. I mean, it's the rule book isn't set in stone, so we'll see what they do if they get enough feedback. But these are the two things that are my two of the cons, and then I have a big one that I will get to now, and that is the rule of Feyd-Rautha. Like his ability, he basically pops up when the Harkonnen's victory points counter goes to 6, I think, and then one of his abilities is to lower, one of the bad things that happens, like when you don't give spies, and there will be an Imperial ban. So you just lower something to get the Imperial ban. And if you do that, you get a victory point for free. So basically the Harkonnen is winning the game at 9 victory points, because there's no point if the bad thing that you get from using Feyd to get a victory point never triggers, because you've won the game at 10 victory points. So basically the Harkonnen is currently playing to get to 9 victory points. Feyd will be in play by automatically, and when you get to 6, and then you just make sure you have him ready so he can do that. And if you don't put him on the board, your opponent can't hit him and kill the army he's in. So that's something they need to fix, because that's really anticlimactic, and that is what happened in the game that ended in round 2. It didn't actually end in round 2. At the end of round 2, my opponent had 9 victory points, and Feyd-Rautha was in play, so at the first opportunity for the Harkonnen in the second round, he would just do that and win the game. That needs to be addressed, because it's a feel bad situation, it's anticlimactic, and it's a rule that doesn't matter. Like, why do I care if I get something negative when I win the game anyway? So yeah, I guess that's like the big thing, but that's easily fixed because it's just changing the text on Feyd-Rautha's card, so I can absolutely see them fixing that as they go to print, so to speak. And with that, we get to my closing remarks. And basically, I like this game. It's Dune in a box, just like War of the Ring is Lord of the Rings in a box. It feels really fun. There are a few issues that they need to fix, and that I know these designers. I've worked with them like professionally, so I know they're capable of finding these things and tweaking them. And there might be other issues that they know that I don't know, and stuff like that. So I am positive that this will be, the gameplay will be good enough to warrant a purchase. Now, if you want my opinion on if you should buy it on the Kickstarter or not, I'm not like I don't have one say one way or the other. But like the things I'm really interested in is the gameplay. Most of the stuff that Simon does are minis, and minis don't really affect the gameplay. They affect how you feel when you see the game in front of you. Some people, like absolutely love, the more immersed you get if it's really gorgeous components, 3D cities, 3D ecological research testing stations, whatever they were called, like stuff like that. Like none of those are needed. The price is high, shipping is high, tax if you live in the UK or in the EU or in the US, I mean, tax is high everywhere depending on the rules for the shippings. It's a lot of money. So the base game would have been amazing with just basic miniatures like War of the Ring has. So it's an easy buy on the gameplay. I don't know if it's worth everything you have to pay to get all the goodies. And this is where I think what they call it, the Kickstarter, the different versions of history, they're called something else. Possible futures, they're called. Like, because they give you what-if scenarios, just like the expansions to World of the Ring does, like Lords of Middle-earth, Wars of Middle-earth. What would happen if the Balrog went outside of Moria? What would happen if something that actually didn't happen in the story happened? And those things are good. How important they are in this case, I can't say. But having them there is always a good thing. And if they're not there in retail, that might be the reason to get the Kickstarter version. And then you just decide if you want the nice map, the expansion of the fighters, what are they called, the navigators, and so on. I don't really have a say in that, and you shouldn't listen to me because I don't know your how much money you have and can spend on board games or not. But what I can say is, like, if this was just a base game and the rules were as they are with a few tweaks, this is an insta buy at normal retail price for this kind of game, this kind of size and these kind of minis. But I think it would have been as good with simpler minis like War of the Ring, and it would have sold just as much. A few people buy them for the minis, and I can see that because I can easily see people using these miniature to fight miniature battles as well, like Warhammer and stuff like that, using the Fedakeen and the Sardaukars or the Fremen and the Harkonnen troops and doing stuff like that as well. And the painting, like if you love painting as well, I'm a big painter. So that's also a reason to buy the stuff, because you get really cool minis that are more fun to paint than the War of the Ring minis. So it's basically like, if you like the gameplay, it's definitely buy the game, maybe wait for retail. But if you see a benefit in all the other stuff, yeah, why not do the Kickstarter as well if you can afford it? That's more or less what I can say about this. But if Francesco and Marco fixes a few issues I can see, I think this game is going to be, I'm not going to say as popular as World of the Ring, because it will never leave my heart because I've worked on it personally. I've done professional work on it, so it's too close to my heart. But I can see it being up there, like with Rebellion, as another one of those that are almost as good as War of the Ring. So yeah, hopefully you like this comparison, looking at Dune from the view of a War of the Ring player. And hopefully you can decide on what to do, and hopefully you will enjoy the game as much as I have.